Welcome back to another edition of Diamond Star Stories, featuring the cards of the 1934 to 1936 Diamond Star set. As promised, today's edition will feature the card I purchased a year ago at the Chicago Sports Spectacular, a card that's now been in my possession for just under a year, and it's one of my favorite cards of the set by far, and definitely one of my favorite cards that I own, period. It is none other than Hall of Fame second baseman, shortstop, third baseman, and manager, Raja Hornsby. I mispronounced his nickname there for a minute. Roger Hornsby was born in 1896 in Winters, Texas, and he debuted in Major League Baseball in 1915. What I was able to learn about him while he grew up in Texas is he was the youngest of 6 kids, and his father passed away when he was all of 2 years old, which forced his older siblings to kind of go to work at an early age, and as a result of it, he himself was exposed to work at an early age, starting to work as early as age 10, if I think I read correctly, and he was also invited to participate in a lot of the company teams at that time. He did go on to high school, but left 2 years early after the 10th grade to go work, because obviously the family needed that assistance at that time, as they were kind of growing up in poverty at that time. So they were all hustling and working to try and make ends meet. During that time, he turned to semi-pro baseball while he was still working, and he was actually able to move on into the minor leagues for a period of time before he was scouted and later signed by the St. Louis Cardinals at that time, who were managed by Miller Huggins. He debuted with the Cardinals in 1915 and actually got his very first hit off of a Hall of Famer, Rube Marquand, at that time. But he didn't really come into his own until right at the end of the dead ball era. He was one of those players that played predominantly after the dead ball era, but much of the way he approached the game was influenced by the dead ball, because that's where he grew up and reared, was in that culture of trying to move the man over. And home runs obviously were less glorified at that time because they were super uncommon and super rare, especially the way that the stadiums were designed up to that point. So he debuted with the Cardinals, and he went on to have a spectacular career. Let's just kind of go through some of his highlights. He is the only player to ever hit 400 and also have 40 home runs in the same season. And that's obviously something we probably won't see again in our lifetime, because obviously no one's reached the 400 mark since 1941 when Ted Williams did so. And even in that season, he didn't hit 40 home runs. Roger Hornsby also hit over 400 2 other times. So he actually hit over 400 3 times in his career. He did it so in 1922, 1924, and 1925. He was, I don't know that part yet, but he was a 2-time MVP. This was before they've had the official MVP award as we know it now. There was a different version of the league MVP award, but he won in 25 and 29. His Triple Crown seasons, he had 2 of those in his career in 1922 and 1925. He won the batting title in the National League 7 times in his career, and he led the league in WAR, which was an unknown statistic at that time, but 11 times in his career he led the league in WAR. His overall career highlights and numbers were his WAR was his 11th all-time. It was 127.3. At the time of his retirement, it would have been much higher. But it obviously didn't have that stat at that time. He's 40th on the hits list at just 2,930 hits. He had 301 home runs. He's 42nd on the RBI list with 1,584. And he is still 3rd on the all-time average list at 358. And oddly enough, he was 2nd for a long time until the Negro Leagues were included in the statistical records and allowed Oscar Charlton to end up having the 2nd highest all-time batting average behind Ty Cobb. So during his time, he actually shared some similarities with Ty Cobb. He was kind of known to be a real ruthless competitor and a guy that tended to be somewhat difficult to get along with. With that said, though, he spent the majority of his career, later part of his career in baseball, as a player manager. He was a player manager starting in 1925 when he actually won the World Series with the St. Louis Cardinals, I think in his 2nd season in 26. And he remained active as a manager across a couple different teams. Going from the Cardinals, he went to the Giants, which he was traded for Frankie Frisch, who came over to the Cardinals and became quite a popular player manager with them. He was with the Giants briefly, then he went over to the Boston Braves. Came over to the Cubs, which was the last season he actually led the league in batting average, and he was a player manager with them there for a couple seasons. Then he went on to the went to the Browns, where this card is actually featured, where he finished up his playing career. Pretty much after 1933, he was not playing many games, didn't appear very often, just was kind of pinch hitting and filling in as needed, and spent most of his time focusing on managing, and wrapped up his playing career in 1937. And at that time, he actually was let go by the St. Louis Browns. But so desperate for money, because he had a reputation of gambling pretty aggressively outside of the diamond, that he was even suspected to have actually been betting on horses during games at times. And so he spent a lot of time kind of trying to make money, but in the minor leagues as a player manager for many years. Eventually was kind of brought back. He was kind of allegedly on sort of the blackball list by Landis because of his association with gambling. But he finally was brought back into the major leagues as a manager in 1952 when Bill Veeck signed him with the Browns. He was there for just a season and a half before like the players were kind of revolting because he was such a surly person to get along with that they wanted to play for somebody else. And that's when Marty Marion was then promoted as the player manager, as he got moved on, as Roger Hornsby was kind of let go and then was later picked up by the Cincinnati Reds later that season, and started with the Reds in 53 before he was let go. And then that was it. That was the end of him being a major league manager. And then he kind of spent many times after there kind of being a special hitting instructor, did some announcing, as he did during that period of time where he was kind of on the blackball list in the late 40s. So Roger Hornsby, kind of just wrapping up, he spent his career across 5 different teams, mostly because kind of his reputation. He had a real hard time getting along with other people, is from everything I kind of read about him, but no one ever denied that he was very talented. He also was a very fast individual. He didn't steal a lot of bases because that wasn't necessarily like something that was glorified as it became later on, where they'd steal a lot of bases, but he would always take extra bases, obviously on the base paths. And he was a competitor, just wanted to be able to win. So later on in life, as I mentioned, he kind of tried to find things to keep himself busy, and did a lot of, was a special hitting instructor and things like that at times during the spring training camps. He was married several times in his career. Sadly, he lost his firstborn son in 1949. He also lost a romantic partner kind of around that time, as she unfortunately committed suicide. And he was survived by a couple kids at the time, where he had passed away in 1963 because of a heart attack. But you kind of see that he had some difficulties being able to kind of stay in a relationship even off the field. As I think he got married, I think 4 separate times, or close to it, 4 separate times. Don't know all the ins and outs of those relationships and why they may or may not have failed. But as you can see, it was somebody who just kind of was trying to find his place very much after even his major league career, but even at times during his major league career, he was trying to find his place, as a lot of his skills started to wane as a outstanding ball player. And I think that may be in part why we don't talk about Roger Hornsby in some of the same ways we do of the superstars from his era, because he was right up there with these guys, and you just don't really talk about Roger Hornsby in the likes of Garrick, Ruth, Cobb, Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson at that time. And has the highest WAR all time for a second baseman. He's still kind of considered by many being the best second baseman in Major League Baseball history. It's debatable. I think when you kind of look at Eddie Collins, he's pretty close with over the same era with his numbers as well. And then obviously Joe Morgan had a very good career during the live ball era later on, when baseball was integrated. But his name is still synonymous, I think, with the St. Louis Cardinals organization. He was later brought into their Hall of Fame in 2014, I believe is what I found, when they reopened the Hall of Fame after they redid it. So Hornsby will always be a name that I think in the St. Louis area will mean something, and obviously probably in the annals of the Baseball Hall of Fame. But I kind of wonder, is this a name that will remain a significant name over time, or will it be always one of those guys you kind of read when you look up career war leaders and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know he was that good, and then you read a little bit more about him and find out he's really good, but he's not one of the first names you kind of gravitate to, just because it's not one that comes off the tip of your tongue when you're talking about like maybe the top 20 hitters of all time, which he probably belongs in that group, but it's not the first name that comes to your mind, unfortunately, for whatever reason. And so there's Roger Hornsby. You know, this card in particular, what's unique about this is not so much that he's pictured with the St. Louis Browns uniform, but this is the only one where you have very distinct faces in the background of the card for whatever reason. This is not something they chose to do with any other card in the set. I think this card, when compared to his two Gaudies from the 33 set, is much more eye-catching amongst the other two, although I do love the horizontal image of Hornsby fielding a ball in the 33 set. Just a really beautiful example here. You can see there's like a little bit of mark here on the back, and they gave it obviously a qualifier of being off center, which you can see it's top to bottom, but other than that, I mean, the card has fantastic corners, perfect registration, everything you'd kind of want in a card from this era. It definitely exceeded my expectations when I picked it up at the time, and I'm very pleased to still have it in my collection. And when it's up in my case here, it's right next to one of my other favorite cards in the set, the Ted Lions, and they're back-to-back. They just look fantastic next to each other. But there's my Roger Hornsby card. To date, probably my most fantastic pickup from the card show at the Chicago Sports Spectacular. It was my top card, I think, from last year. I'll have to look up my list from the top 50 of last year. It was my top card, I think, from any Chicago Sports Spectacular, including the Greenberg maybe included. And I will continue to love this card, and I will continue to kind of talk about his abilities as an all-time great hitter. But there it is, Roger Hornsby. I will be back next month with the final chapter for this year, and I'll figure out which player I'm going to do. And it should be kind of fun selecting, since I have the majority of the cards now. I have a lot to select from. All right, have a great rest of your week.